but not just one of them, lots of them, sucking up that CO2 out of the atmosphere. So that plays a huge role, and what the model is telling us is that it's the least cost way, or it's a big part of the least cost way of New Zealand achieving net zero emissions or lower emissions. How did we get to there? Right. All right. I think.
We've got 5 minutes left.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Should be right. Yeah. Insight 4, that the change will require extensive but not radical land use change. And there's a lot of shouting about this at the moment. And I think these diagrams show it's a little bit overexcited. So in the vertical axis here, you've got millions of hectares of acres, millions of hectares, and again, time along the horizontal axis. And you can see this big blue one is sheep and beef. The brown one is existing forests. And you can see the light brown is new exotic forests. And in this scenario here, we allowed for some native forestry. So you can see it's certainly eating into the sheep and beef land, and that would be marginal land, sheep and beef. And already sheep and beef farmers are selling up, and forestry companies are investing. And you can see that the extent of investment in forestry gets larger for the zero net emissions targets. So there's still a lot of sheep and beef farming even after that's happening. Forestry is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. I would imagine everyone in this room understands. You only get forests sequestering carbon if you keep on increasing the area under forestry. So eventually you're going to run out of land. So it's a way of buying time. By the time we get to 2050, hopefully technology will show us another relatively cheap way to sequester or to reduce the gross emissions. But that's something to keep in mind, and is a big caveat. Of course, if nothing's coming along, the carbon price will be going up well before 2050 to signal that problem. Transformational technology number 2, again, this has been talked about a lot today. This is Simon Coates, one of our modelers. He's in his EV. And of course, it's not just Simon who's going to do it. We're going to need lots and lots of these EVs in order to reduce emissions from transport, at least in light transport. Is that feasible? This shows the blue line is what our Ministry of Transport is or was projecting at the time we did the inquiry, the take-up of EVs as a proportion of the light fleet. Our model says you've got to go faster than that if you're going to achieve the targets. So this is actually the stock of EVs. So in the end, you need to be up to about 75% of the fleet needs to be EVs. If you look at the flow, you've got to get moving pretty quickly. You can see that by the mid-2020s, about 50% of the new vehicles coming in, which could be brand new or new second-hand, will have to be EVs if we're going to be on track to achieve those stock numbers. And finally, final insight is electricity. So that's been talked about plenty today, so I won't dwell a lot on that. So the system is there, already a lot of hydro and wind. The modelling tells us that the things to look at, this is where we are at the moment, this one here. So the big increase, so Alison said that their modelling showed that it's a doubling of capacity. Our modelling didn't come up with such a big number, but it's still significant. I think it was between 45 and 60% increase in capacity. Mostly new renewable, which is, a lot of it will be wind. and also another point that she made, retaining some fossil peaking capacity. Otherwise you get rid of that and you've suddenly got a very expensive marginal costs of the electricity system, which would be counterproductive in terms of the overall goal of incentivizing emissions reductions elsewhere in the economy. So, summarising the insights that we got from this modelling, achieving net zero in New Zealand by 2050 is possible. Without the help of technology, it will require pretty high emissions prices. Expanding forestry a lot is a low-cost measure, but it poses challenges beyond 2050. Interestingly, one of the mainstays of our economy, dairy, does not change much in terms of that land use because it can achieve pretty high high international prices when it's sold. But sheep and beef do decline significantly. And expanding the light EV fleet and clean electricity generation is also an important part of the overall picture. But the government should not aim for, at least in the meantime, for zero emissions electricity because of our problems of, well, the general intermittency of renewables, plus the fact that we've got a particular issue with a dry year and limited hydro storage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for those insights. Our next speaker is Christophe Bonnery. He's the Executive Vice President of the Association and also immediate past president. Of course, he's also been the president of the French Energy Economics Association for the last decade or so he's really in the middle of things. And I think you have a day job as well as Vice President Economics for the French Energy Distribution Company. So I'll find you slides if you like. Okay. Which ones were they?
That's this one.
And it is.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and I would like to share with you my vision. I've been asked to speak at the end of this session, which is on low carbon economy, about what policy could be applied, what regulation could be applied to reach this low carbon target. The company I'm working for, Enedis, is the French distribution company, which is an operator operating in all the territory. Is not producing any studies, any models, but we are using the one of others, and we are only, I will show anyway some modeling that we have performed, but at the distribution levels. For those who don't know what is a distribution system operator, in unbundled markets, you have the segmentation of the value chain in generation, transmission, distribution, and supply of electricity. We are operating in the, as you can see, Enedis, in the distribution part, which is low voltage, below 60 kV volts. The role of the activity of the company is to connect people to the grid, is to run the existing grid, to supply assistance to local communities which want to develop in new areas, is to make some remote modeling, remote control of the grid, to ensure troubleshooting and to do the metering for the suppliers. This is what we are doing, this is our activity. And in numbers, the revenue is 14 billion euro. We have 16 million customers, which are mainly families in the country, and we invest every year 4 billion euro, which is not nothing, just to maintain and to update the grid. So we are in a world of energy transition, and the question is to know in which direction we should invest this 4 billion euro. Is it for decentralized generation or centralized generation? So the grid will not be the same at the end of the period. I will skip that one. So to discuss about the question, can we find policies or regulation which could help low carbon economy? First of all, we have to wonder, if we can find an optimum, an economic optimum in this policy or this regulation. It's not so easy because we are living in a world of paradox. The first paradox is the fact that on oil markets, we have today one supplied oil market, but at the same time we are facing some political tensions, uncertainties, and so usually when economists look at uncertainty, it means volatility and markets which are not very much supplied. So this is the first paradox. Second paradox is coming from the fact that we are willing to cut rapidly emissions, but at the same time we are at the highest level of the emission. So do we have reached a plateau, or will it continue to increase? This is the second paradox. Third one is we claim to give energy to all, but at the same time we have, as Yukari said, almost 1 billion people without any access to energy. So this is what we say, and this is what we observe is not exactly the same. And so for another topic is linked to the decrease of technology, of cost of technologies for low carbon emissions, but at the same time they require to be subsidized or help. Do we leave the market working, or should we help them as they require? So in this condition, the question is, do we think that energy policies will be efficient, energy or regulation will be that much efficient? So one answer is look at the past. In the past, we are talking about the energy mix. This is showing the energy mix. I have taken this graph from the energy information. So for the International Energy Outlook, they have measured the share of all the primary energy in the 1990 mix. So as you can see, most of the share was composed of coal. A few years later, we have a big development of oil in red, and the decrease of the coal. Just before the first oil crisis, we reached a very significant amount of the electric energy mix composed of oil. Then, because of this crisis, the share of oil decreased, and we have a strong increase of the gas share. Not many changes between 2000 and 2018. But the real question is not the share, but it is the volume. What has happened is that between 1919 and today, that the volume has been multiplied by 10, simply by 10. So talking about energy mix is good, but let's look first at how much energy we are consuming, and this is a question of energy efficiency behind that. In the future, the World Energy Outlook that I quote here is still anticipating increase of the energy demand. So the question of the share of which technology will be the supplier is one question which will be addressed by the future regulation. If we look again in the past 20 years, the addition of oil was about 1,000 million ton equivalent, oil equivalent, and the share of electricity was a little bit lower. In the future, this is the opposite. The most increase will come from electricity, and we have a small increase of oil. So how do we have to adapt the regulation to make this shift? This is the second question I would like to ask. We have not only discrepancies over time since 1919, but also in the different regions. And this graph is showing what Yukari mentioned, is a strong increase in the demand depending on the continent. If we look at China, India, and Africa population, you can see that the order is giving Africa as the lowest population. In 3 years, they will all have the same population, and in 2040, as you can see, Africa will considerably increase, and we'll have a strong rate in the future. What will be the impact on the energy demand? On oil, Africa will be in the second position before China and Middle East. For gas, it will be in the third position, while it is at nothing today. And Africa will be the last one, but not marginal, in the coming years. And it could be even higher if we give more subsidies to the renewable in this continent. What will be the winner? The winner in the world, at the world level would be, according to the International Energy Agency, not coal, because coal will plateau in the coming years. We can see that coal will be replaced by gas, which is climbing very sharply. Nuclear, as you all know, will increase in some regions and decrease in other ones, so I don't have to develop what has been said before. And the winner will be hydro, essentially in Africa, wind, and the first, as it is written in the title, will be the solar PV at the global level. Electricity will have to face a challenge, and the challenge will be the capacity to be flexible, because we have to observe that this new energy will come from renewable. Renewable is generating when you have wind or when you have sun, and the demand is moving very quickly. So the question is to bring flexibility to the system. This graph is showing, in the case of Europe in the year 2018, the flexibility from 1 hour to the other hour, to the next hour. This dot, red dot here, is representing what happened on July 15, 2018, during the final of the soccer World Cup, when all people switched on their TV from 1 hour to the other, and this generated a 20% increase of the energy demand. So we had to switch on nuclear plants and coal plants and so on. This was at that moment. The same year, in another part of the world, we had India. It was not football, but cricket, which generated this match generated a strong increase of the energy demand. So this is an increase, but you have also decrease. When in December 2018, the big storm was installed over Europe. We had a very strong amount of wind, and we have to switch off 20% of the installed capacity of the conventional plants. If you run this calculation over 1 year, you can see that you have plenty of dots like that. This is the present situation, 2018. With the mix that I have shown before, we need to have a very strongly higher capacity of flexibility. So this is the view of the distribution, which has to adapt the grid and to make sure that all this variation has to be adapted, has to be available. I will switch that one because the time is running. This one also. This is the case of Europe, which is showing that the first winner in Europe will not be solar PV contrary to the world, but it will be the offshore windmills, because there is a lack of available surface to develop onshore windmills, so it will be offshore windmills in Europe. So this I will skip that one also, it is well known. When we talk about regulation and policies to be applied for low carbon economy, we have to agree on what energy transition means. Depending on the country, you have different meanings. In Europe, for instance, energy transition in Germany means abandon nuclear. That's clear. In the United Kingdom, it's to return to nuclear and to build Hinkley Point, for instance. About nuclear, Poland would like to join nuclear. France is organizing debates, and we are discussing on whether we should have or not more decrease, or shut down or increase more, or having more capacities. So this is the vision of Europe. We could, as you can see, you have different visions. In other continents, in the US, energy transition means switching off coal plants and using shale gas or shale oils. This is a way to have a path for energy transition. In China, it's to fuel the demand, the growth with the new capacities of energies. And in Africa, as we have said, it's to avoid fuel poverty. So first, before knowing how we could cope with low carbon economies, the question is to know which path we should know, and simply observing what is happening shows that we have different policies. What is the vision of the distribution system operator regarding that? If you look at the object of energy, if you consider electricity sector, the energy transition objects are the electric vehicles, the renewable energies, the batteries, demand side management and prosumers or self-generation. It's also smart meters, smart grids, smart everything, smart consumers if you want, and also the collection of data and artificial intelligence, which is supposed to be coming from that. Most of these new objects are connected to the distribution grid, if not all. This shows that the challenge is coming for this kind of operator. Of course, they will impact the other segment of the value chain, but it will not be directly connected to these segments. Just to remind what is the target for electric vehicle, the European Union aims to build 60 million electric vehicles by 2040. France is, in this scenario, is estimating it will be between 6 and 12 million vehicles at the same horizon. The investment in the sector of distribution is the most important over all the other sectors. More than $200 billion have been invested between 2015 and 2017 in the distribution sector. And we are already discussing of the coal plants, nuclear plants, and the rest, and the windmills, but we are only forgetting the first contributors to the investment in the energy sector. In the electricity sector, pardon me. We are talking about smart grid. Smart grid is nice, as we can see here in the three countries, China, Europe, and the United States, are generating more than 50% of the investment in smart generation. But if you look at the total investment in the grid, it is a very small amount of what is invested in the system. So we need to reinforce that. And what I would like to show at an example of the distribution operator is when we consider this is a model that we have built in our company. This is the Paris region, and in the middle this is Paris City, where I hope to find all of you in the next international conference in June. You can see here the increase of the development of electric vehicle, municipality by municipalities. And this is in one scenario that we call the gray scenario, which is a business as usual scenario. As you can see, there is no homogeneity at all in the development of electric vehicle, because you have, for instance, a population which are richer. This is a place, the west of Paris, where people are more rich than the people in the east of Paris. So they have more capacity to invest in new cars, and the new car will be electric. So this is in one scenario. As you can see, my message is there is no homogeneity. If you take another scenario, which is a green scenario, in this green scenario, you have subsidies, more subsidies to electric vehicles. You have the same subsidy for all, but you do not have at all the same distribution in the same region. The municipalities are completely different. So being able to model and to anticipate what it means is an information which helps us to know in which, if we have to invest this 4 billion euro, in one municipality or in the other municipality. This is very important. So this is the penetration of electric vehicle. We have the same in the consumption. As you can see, this is the same scenario. But this, even in the green scenario, we have less homogeneity than we have in the, if we examine only the number of electric cars. Why? Because we have some paradox. As you can see here, we have plenty of electric vehicles, but they don't run that many kilometers. They stay in the same city. While people around Paris are making more kilometers, and they consume more electricity. So, knowing in which direction we have to invest is something important, and so we have to do one solution on policy and regulation is to look at the local level rather than having a too much aggregated approach and looking at state level. One answer is at local level. And the last slide I would like to show is just to remind you the share of the bill of a standard consumer. This is the case in France, but in the rest of Europe it's the same. In light blue, this is the share in the invoice of the supply. Dark blue is the share of the grid, and the rest is tax. If you remove the tax, you have 50-50. 50% grid, 50% supply. We always discuss about the mix, but we just forget 50% of the problem. It's very important to take that. And if, as a grid operator, I need to, so just this slide is showing that we have the same story in all the other French, European states. This share of the graph is comparing cost and price. As good economists, we should know that price and cost should reflect the same information, otherwise we don't send the right price signal. In average in Europe, in the electricity bills, 50% is fixed, 93% is variable, so meaning that depending on how many kilowatt hours we are consuming. The cost is composed of 50%, 35% energy, 26% network and metering, meaning that this part is fixed and of the tariff, and the fixed part in the future will be of 65%. So we have no direct, because this network is fixed, and energy in the future where we have low carbon technologies, which are essentially fixed cost tariffs. This will generate very big difference between the two, and that means that we are very much away from sending a right price signal to the consumer. To conclude, I would like just to remind that the support of policies and regulation on what should be the future low carbon economy depend on what vision we have in different countries and what the future will be. And I've tried to show that we have many uncertainties. Second, that in the past the world has changed and it will continue to change. The technology to meet with decarbonization are existing. We have not mentioned any disruption. We could imagine disruption, but it's not necessary. The consumer will decide at the end if he moves or not to electric vehicle, if he decides to be a self-generator, if he decides to have on his own roof some solar PV, or this is the consumer who is deciding that. He will also facilitate the way to have smart behaviors with a smart grid and smart meters. And also, I want also to remind the strong investment needed in distribution networks. The need to give a right price signal to everyone, and also to increase the share of fixed elements in the tariffs. So, general conclusion: network infrastructure is important, of course. Demand side management, distributed generation, all the three are the game changer for energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christoph. And yeah, so we've had 3 presentations, lots of information, lots of insights, and I think we have about 20 minutes for conversation in the room. So can I suggest that the speakers line up here, we'll grab a chair each and get going. In. Yeah, here's one.
We can stand. We can just stand.
Okay, and I think we won't use a microphone. We should just be able to speak with a loud voice. Can I just start you off? Actually, you all 3 spoke about electric vehicles, okay, different aspects of it. And Yukari, you mentioned, you showed the projection or scenario of peak oil, maybe towards 2050. What do you see as plausible scenarios for oil supply and oil prices as we're getting more and more electrification of transport? Right? So will we see a declining oil price towards ever towards a diminishing marginal cost of oil extraction, and therefore a drawn-out competition between EVs and conventional cars? What are the scenarios for?
Since you mentioned the oil supply or oil consumption, actually I skipped the assumption, but we assume that the oil price will be down, much lower than the reference scenario where we assume that it just trend will go up. But in our scenario where, in our case, we assume the rapid introduction or fully replaced by the electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid and fuel cell cars case, we have 60, I skipped off my mind. I think it was $60 per barrel in 2050 in comparison to $100 per barrel, just in the rough range of that. So much lower oil price because the demand has grown.
Jeff, what do you think would happen in New Zealand with a plummeting oil price? Would the New Zealand government increase the petrol and diesel taxes to compensate for it, or would you see the transition slowing down?
Well, my initial remark would be to say that it should be seen as a threat to a transition, that oil prices will really plummet, and that will slow it down. As an economist, you'd have to say, well, prices could fix it. And in the New Zealand system, as we envisaged it, there are emissions budgets, and if oil prices drop and there's people still want, because of that, wanting to use fossil fuels and emit, they're going to need permit at some point in the system, and the price will go up. So there is the possibility of offsetting it with a high emissions price, but it will push up the emissions price, and that's going to be a cost. Yeah.
Right. On the question whether the development of electric vehicles will affect significantly the oil market, I have strong doubts, because the oil is not used only for the transport sector, but as we all know, for the chemical use and so on. And in the transport sector, if you look at the oil segment, I don't see before 2030 aircraft flying with electricity. And in the remaining, the passenger fleets and the freight is very much, I think the share of passenger fleet is very low. And so I will paraphrase what Sheikh Elani said when he said that the age of stone disappeared, and because of lack of stone, and the age of oil will not disappear because of a lack of oil.
Actually, what I didn't mention was more the variety of, how to say, the product concern for the oil companies.
Okay, we have a number of questions, comments in the room. I've got two in the middle.
So, in the discussion of the transition to electric vehicles, do you allow for the fact that if you have more electric vehicles, there will be less tax take from liquid fuels, and that the government will have to do something about that, which probably will raise the cost of electric vehicles? Also, if you go to more ride sharing and so forth, it may actually lead to a substitution out of public transport into vehicles. And with Christoph, I mean, if you restructure electricity prices, which you may have to do, as you point out, there's a bigger fixed component and so on, it's probably going to have a big impact on consumers putting in generation at the local level. So again, these are sort of countervailing forces to the things we're talking. Anyone like to comment on?
Okay, thank you, Peter. That's another conclusion I skipped mentioning. Because of the heavily taxed oil products for the transport usage, the governments who are dependent on the income from that will lose a lot from them. So it's not only the oil companies which will reconsider the configure of the refinery product or refinery facilities, but also the government has to rethink where do we get the income from. We didn't go that far of subsidizing the public transport, but it is a point to consider for the government.
Okay, on the share of fixed and variable cost in the tariff, it is true that the tariff of electricity has been used as an instrument by politicians to give a signal to consume less energy. And whether the structure of cost was different, and this is true. This was true in the case of energy when there was in the past a strong variable component of energy. But in the decarbonized technology, which is nuclear, which is windmills and solar PV, the fixed share is very important, only capital and no variable cost. So in the future, we could ask whether we send the right price signal to generation, and it's the same for the grid. So the question is really a political question. Do we want to consume less energy? But if energy is free because it is wind, why? Why should we do that? So I think, I don't have to convince you, all economists here, we need to send a price signal which is representing the cost structure. If it is not a cost structure, we are away from the global optimum.
On electric vehicles and paying for the roads, at the moment the only subsidy to electric vehicles is that in New Zealand, is that they're exempted from road user charges or fuel tax. But I know that it is being recognised very much that system will need to change as the proportion of electric vehicles climbs, and they'll be subject to road user charges like other vehicles.
Yeah. So I have a question of Jeff and Christoph. Jeff, you are fortunate in New Zealand that you have a lot of land, and the expansion of the tree and forest is a good opportunity for New Zealand to reduce the CO2 emissions. But I'm wondering, for example, why not we use forest resources for advanced biofuel and decarbonize the transport sector? At the same time, there's a lot of biogas coming in New Zealand. Maybe that can be used with electricity and also liquefied biogas like in Sweden transportation. For Christoph, so one point we are talking about something like a very fragmented policy, and it's a very people-oriented policy, But I think, sometimes we have to, inform the people aware, because, for example, see the difference, the perception of the people in Germany and France. France is doing so well on nuclear, but there is a, anti-nuclear campaign in Germany. So I don't know what the reason. Maybe it's a political reason, or maybe there is some reason. It's a technology, it's nuclear technology, right? Since France is doing very well, why there's so much concern in Germany or some other European country about against the nuclear? So how we can, and the other thing is that even Europe reduce, the zero emission by 2050, if there is no contribution, personal contribution from the US and the emerging economies, you cannot do much about it, right? So how we can intervene in this situation?
I think you can take your pick of these different.
Okay. So I start to some different which the question is, well, there is no optimal solution because first of all, if we want an optimal solution, we have to eliminate the political aspect first. And as you just rightly said, this is a political decision. The energy vision is a political decision. And as we know, the time to implement an optimal solution in the energy sector lasts decades, but the mandate, the term of the politician is only 5 years. So suppose the election is changing, you change the policy, so you are not on the right trajectory, you are never on the right trajectory. And as we all know that one size does not fit all, we have countries which have energy resources, wind, or coal, or nothing, and some countries which are, all the countries are different because of their resource. They are different because of their consumption habits, because they are more green oriented, I would say, or more, they consume more. So at the end, you arrive to the situation that I have presented, which is Germany doing that, France doing that, and so there is no global optimum but I think that if we are flexible, we could find an optimum. And that's true that Europe, even if it wants to decarbonize its economy, is very small compared to the rest of the world. But still, if it is feasible and accessible, there is an exemplarity, this is a kind of symbol. And if we can do that, we pay for, we finance technology which will be available in other regions of the world. Well, I know this is it's not a complete, there is no solution to that, but to the question whether, I try to answer to the question whether policy and regulation may be a solution, not so sure.
Just one question about, I took it to you asking about using forestry as biofuel.
Yeah.
Yes. There's certainly support for that in New Zealand. Well, there are enthusiasts for biofuels. I think that the main application is probably in processing. We have a good chunk of emissions from drying milk from in the dairy sector. That's largely done with coal at the moment. But at the moment, the economics don't stack up. The emissions price on the coal would have to affect the coal and push its price up a lot more, according to the dairy companies, before they could contemplate switching to biofuels. But it's an ongoing area of research and development, so wouldn't rule it out.
I never understood that milk powder was such an energy-intensive product. I've got Tom in the corner. Maybe.
I just had a quick question. It was really, I first thought of it when I saw the New Zealand estimates for electric vehicles ramping up, but it's also relevant to the developing world. About used cars, whether when you were developing those sort of policy scenarios, did you guys internally at the Productivity Commission talk about what would happen to the used car market, especially for petrol vehicles? Because with rapid diffusion, you've got that sort of...
Yes, we did. Many of our vehicles are imported second-hand from Japan. Yeah. So there is a threat there that as the transition to EVs take place, without some regulation on that, New Zealand risks becoming a dumping ground for very cheap fossil fuel vehicles, and people will go for them. The government is, I think it's a reasonably firm proposal to apply a fee-based scheme for imported vehicles, both new and used. That would be a subsidy for low emissions vehicles, according to Paolo, and the funds, and that would be fiscally neutral because the cost of those subsidies would be collected from a tax on the higher emissions vehicles. So that would provide some protection for that happening.
If I may add just an example, in France until now it was forbidden to convert a fossil fuel car to an electric car. Now we have passed a new regulation. You can convert a fossil fuel car in electric car. It's possible. I think it's in the context of circular economy. Once you have something which is able to go on the street, what you could changing the engine is not a bad idea.
We have a question here.
Okay, I'm just a simple question for Jill. And you mentioned there up towards 2015 there is their emission, their CO2 emission scenarios we already suggested. But I think that from this year or a few years ago, after the release of the non-CO2 GHG emissions reported by EPA, I think there is growing concern on their non-CO2 GHG emissions. And I'm wondering that the New Zealand government has some measures controlling the to decrease the ongoing non-CO2 GHG emissions in New Zealand, especially for agriculture country.
Yeah, this is very interesting. In fact, in our report, we recommended that the government set true targets in its legislation, and it in fact has done that. We'll take credit for that. One is for long-lived greenhouse gases, and the target should be net zero, which it is. And then a second target for short-lived